Good afternoon, good morning, and welcome everyone to our executive summary webinar on replatforming enterprise applications. My name is Don Geertz. I am the business development lead at Blanc Labs. I'll be your host for the next 30 minutes. And presenting today is Dariush Zomorrodi, our Chief Innovation Officer at Blanc Labs. Dariush is a respected thought leader specializing in corporate innovations. His background includes many technology leadership roles in the launching of many innovative technology initiatives. Before Dariush begins, we have a few housekeeping items to cover. This presentation is being recorded and will be sent to all attendees. Communication lines will be muted to keep this session comfortable for everyone. Please submit questions via the chat window and we will address them at the end of the presentation. Tomorrow we will draw a name to receive the free Apple AirPods, and we will be contacting the winner by email. We will be coordinating more webinars on a regular basis in 2019, starting in January. We invite you to connect and engage with us on LinkedIn and Twitter to stay informed on upcoming topics. So that is it for housekeeping. We now welcome Dariush.
Thank you very much, Don. Good day, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. What I'm going to be covering today is talking a little bit about replatforming and how I have been involved in replatforming projects from our experience at Blanc Labs, and what are the reasons people are replatforming today, what types of replatforming do we have, if you want to consider it, when you should consider it, and if you want to build a team in order to go to combat with replatforming, what you need to take with you, and essentially how to plan and execute this. At the end, we're going to have some question and answers. Before starting, I'd like to talk about an innovative project that I came across where I found Mercedes-Benz took a very simple concept of a four-door passenger car and changed some mechanical parts of the vehicle and the wheels and put it on a railroad track in order to take passengers from A to B in a very small, short shuttle service mode. And it's fascinating to see that they were actually able to reinvent the wheel in 2015. Although a lot of people critiqued the whole point why this project was done, but it tells us a few lessons on taking an existing product and repurposing it on a different platform and changing the mechanics and the architecture of it without changing the look to perform another task. And that leads into what we want to talk about today in replatforming software and in software engineering. And the digital platforms are changing around the world, and in like 2 years from now, almost 60% of enterprises will be changing their digital platform at an enterprise level. And one of you folks that are on this webinar listening is probably a decision maker. One of you is working in a team that is doing replatforming or is planning for replatforming, or somehow this may impact your job in the tech and digital industry. In the past, when we were building software, we were focusing only on the software maintenance part of the post-launch. Is it going to be affordable? Do we have teams to maintain it? What's the total cost of ownership over there? And we were very much worried about the bugs and if it's not working. In fact, statistics shows that 80% of maintenance is because of functionality enhancements and the things that our business and our customers are asking. And today, most of the focus is not on maintenance. In fact, we build software and engineering it based on replaceability of the software. What that means is that components of the software can be removed and new components can be introduced in order to address the needs and of the functionality of what the market wants or what the customer wants. And this is essentially considered replaceability. I mean, if you look at the architectural evolution of software from when it started, many decades ago, and now today, the modern architecture of the software industry, you can see that today we have old systems that are still running, especially in the financial institutions, and modern architecture of software lives next to them side by side. And we see these applications being able to work with each other and perform. I'd like to spend some time to look at the evolution and see how we stand today with this evolution of the software industry. When we started building the applications in the early days, it was a monolithic application. The data and the logic were all canned into one box, and the user would log in or access the software through components of the user interface that comes with the software. And later on, the need became to offer the software, the data of the software to other applications, whether it's because of mobile technology or whether it's partners and other systems. And application interfacing was introduced, and APIs were built to access the data and make it available to other applications and platforms. Today, the modern architecture is decoupling the data and the logic. And where we see today, the architecture is essentially taking the data as a lower layer of the software stack, and then the logic is broken into little services called microservices, and a little gateway is built on top, whereas the application interfaces are introduced, where they can go through these pipes, access the services and the data, and make it available to outside world. The software industry has its own user interface for applications that are enterprise, and enterprises have their own mobile apps, and through the APIs are now making their services and data available to third-party parties and the cloud solutions. Now, it's quite interesting to see that within a few years, by 2021, most of the applications in the world are going to be moving towards a hyper-agile architecture, whereas 80% of the applications that are developed are going to be on cloud platforms as a service. They're going to all be using microservices and cloud functions. And 95% of these microservices are going to be deployed in containers. This is the evolution as we see. Now, when I work with our clients, I told them, let's just stand back, let's just take a pause and look at the landscape of where we stand with our software architecture today. Are we a monolith? What are we going to do? What are our business needs? Are we going to be building application interfacing? Do we already have application interfacing? And what is the need of the business and partners and other vendors in order to move us towards a modern application architecture and introducing APIs and microservices? And this is a good segue for us to start right now talking about replatforming. The definition of replatforming is quite broad. Some people just say, we take it as a train from a slow track and we're going to put it on a fast track. Some consider it a train or a ship that it's in its journey and we're going to change its engine while it's moving fast. And some consider it, changing the whole entire technology of the rail. We're now going from an old railroad to a magnetic or a fast track with a whole aerodynamic train that is moving with a total different architecture. So it can be from a very simple move to a very complex rebuild. And I think the first and most important question to ask is, why are we replatforming? In my experience, when I'm working with a lot of enterprise clients, I see that the biggest driver for them is the new business needs and new users. They have force from outside. They have to make the software to market very fast. Their legacy systems are inflexible and limited. They don't have scalability to increase number of usage. And at the end, they want to save on the total cost of ownership. And we came across an interesting stat that shows the correlation between replatforming and innovation. And the IT innovation spending that is happening in the world right now is significantly around the areas of improvement on productivity and customer satisfaction, in operating costs, and increasing revenue, becoming competitive, and taking it to the market very fast. And this is where the organizations are spending their dollar amount on IT innovation. Now, when we work with our clients, the first thing we are going to be identifying is, are we going to change the infrastructure, the architecture, or both? What are we replatforming? And when I work with them, I introduce a replatforming matrix where we look at the infrastructure architectural changes in terms of complexity, risk, and dependency. Obviously, when we are moving on the infrastructure zone only, we change the environment, our dependency becomes higher, but it's very low complexity. But when we are doing a whole rebuild on the architecture, we have high complexity with low dependency because we're still in the same environment. And if we make a radical move from a bottom left to a top right, we're facing a high complex, high dependency, and high risk environment. Now, let's look at examples of each one of these one by one. A simple lift and shift type of replatforming is the most common that we have seen in the industry. Why people do this? The drivers are scalability, operational expenses, and total cost. They want to go to the cloud, move it, and gain those improvements. The challenges that we see enterprises are having in this kind of a lift and shift is essentially regulatory approval, because at this time you see that data is being moved from on-premise to the cloud, and there's a lot of questions around, is this going to be something that the regulatory people are going to approve or not? Second type is the rebuild, where we go from a current infrastructure to a new infrastructure. Flexibility and business and customer and external drivers are the main forces here. And sometimes people come and say, oh, I have a challenge to justify this ROI because the look and feel of the app is the same. We just change everything behind the scene and the architecture has changed. So the challenge you may face over there may be on the ROI justification. Now, on the radical change of app transformation, we see that time to market, scalability, and flexibility all come together as a major driver. And here, your biggest challenge will be managing risk. Now, there might be two other alternative ways to do this, which means first, let's go rebuild and then shift it. And in this case, you're still in the same infrastructure. Now, you have limitations within that infrastructure, and your challenge is going to be, how can you build within the same infrastructure and then move it to the new cloud environment? And sometimes we first shift and then transform. Now over there, our challenge is going to be typically expectation management. As soon as you shift it to a new environment, the business, the customers, and everyone is going to come and say, when do we get the new features? When do we get all the benefits? And that's the time that you're going to be under pressure to essentially to do the rebuild and the app transformation. Now, I think the journey of replatforming has a few steps and a few stages. What I'd like to share with you right now is my experience working with a bunch of our great enterprise clients and how we work together in order to make this journey easier. First thing I work with our clients is the replatforming journey checklist. And the first thing I work with the executives is on the motivations and the drivers behind their decision. Why are we doing this? Are you after cost, flexibility, competitiveness? Do you want to optimize things? Let's just list all those motivations. Then let's go figure out who are your resources. What do you have? Do you have the team? Do you have the budget? And actually, do you have the time? You're too busy. And then we focus on benefits. It's very important to know who's going to be benefiting out of this and what are we going to be saving. We need to be able to quantify this to have an ROI on the decision making on the replatforming exercise. And I think research and learn is the most important component here for our solutioning, where we talk about, what are the technology stacks out there? What are the solutions? They are changing every month. You have a new feature coming, a new vendor, a new technology is out there that you can benefit from. Who are you going to be partnering with and why? And the last on the checklist is assessing risk. And we have to identify what is at stake and what if we don't do anything. And that's essentially the clarity you need to have before starting the journey and getting into it. Next, what we do is we work on the journey map. Our framework consists of 6 stages. And the first 2 stages are planning, and the next 4 stages are on execution. We work on scoping and decoupling in an iterative fashion, and then we work on the building of the new platform or the new app, and then bridging between the new infrastructure and the old infrastructure. And then once that bridge is built, we stage the application on the new platform, and after all the testing, we migrate and we go live, we turn it on. It's important to know that all of this is done in an iterative and agile fashion, and we have key stakeholders that are running in each one of these stages. The product owner from the business side is typically the person that has to identify the scoping. The architect is going to be the one who looks at the decoupling stage and looking at all the modern stacks that are out there, and the developers are going to be doing the build. DevOps resources are going to be building the bridges, and then the staging is the all hands, everyone is on deck and building and staging it. And finally, DevOps is going to push it to live. In each one of these stages, there's key steps that we go through, and I'd like to share with you. For example, on scoping, the feature set of the application is going to be reviewed. We decide on what is going to be retired, what is going to go and get into the replatform solution, what is the future stack, and work on the resourcing. The architect is going to work on the decoupling of data, microservices, enterprise bus, any API and security and single sign-on. On the dev, we built the test bed, scaffolding, and the data and the APIs are defined. The 12th factor is considered when we want the application to be portable, and containerization is a very critical component for the modern applications as well. So we throw all of these inside the building stage. On the bridging, which is, I think, a very key component of this framework, is where we move data to a cloud environment or to a new environment. Some of our applications are legacy and will stay in the premise, and we need to build a way to come back and connect them. So cloud peering and cloud security is a challenge that most enterprises are going to be facing while going through this journey. And then it's staging, when we stand up our minimum viable product and stage the data, do a beta release, do A/B testing, and completing the app in an iterative fashion, and going live, migrating the data, deploying it in production, and celebrating it at the end. I think the most important contributor to the success of the project is the replatforming team. And let's spend a few minutes on this. The structure of the team typically is an agile team, and you have a product owner from the business side that will work with a project or a program manager, depending on the size of your project. If it's an enterprise-wide application, you may have a program manager running this. If it's a more smaller contained project, you may have a project manager working on it. But you definitely will have an architect, developers, scrum masters that work with developers on a daily basis, the QA and DevOps resources to run with it. I think when you're planning your team structure, you need to ask some critical questions to build your team. And the most important one is, who's going to work on the replatforming and who's going to work on maintaining what we have today as is? Who can maintain? Do we need a maintenance team? Can our resources maintain and build? And so that's, I think, the fundamental question you need to ask yourself building your team structure. Then I think it's important for you to validate your replatforming journey and your architecture and everything with a subject matter expert to see, do you have the right plan? And you don't want to go 6 months into it and figure out that when you were doing scoping, you forgot to figure out an important component on the bridging side, for example. And then you pick some vendors and you need to ask them the question, can they meet your deadline? Because all these vendors are sometimes busy dealing with multiple enterprise clients, and now you want to know, can they actually give you what you need to do in the right time? And communication plan between you and your customers is very critical in the success of the project. You need to find who's going to be responsible for that in your team. And do you have a steering committee that actually sponsors the project from a large enterprise application? And our research shows that 74% of IT leaders have reported that they lack the major skills that are needed for innovation. And this restricts them to do projects such as a replatforming of enterprise software. And I'd like to close by making a point that replatforming is a surgery. You're going through a surgery of your software application. It is an important one. It's an elective surgery. It's not something you take the patient to an operating room or an ER. It's not a matter of life and death. You're doing it for an enhancement. You're doing it for betterment. You're doing this for growth. So you must make sure that you find the right surgeon in your team. You have the best surgery team. Find the best resources, because this is something that you don't want to put at risk. Although it's elective surgery, you want to find the best surgeon to do it. On that note, we covered all of the topics of our talk today, and I'd like to open it up to some questions from you folks.
Thank you, Dariush. Obviously, there's a lot to think about when considering a successful replatforming initiative. But before we address some questions, let me ask you. Blanc Labs has had the opportunity to work with many different companies in many different industries. What 3 trends do you see with organizations that have started or planning a replatforming initiative?
Right. Sure. I do see 3 major trends that are happening in industry. One is essentially around unlocking data. Data is spread around multiple applications in the enterprise. And I see that a lot of companies are now trying to unlock this data, make it available among applications within the enterprise, or with modern applications that they have or their partners have. Second trend I see, Don, is app transformation. It's essentially the digital journey that the customers of these enterprises have all need to be modernized. The applications are old, they're trying to modernize them. And I think the third trend that we really see every day is talking about cloud enablement, moving to the cloud, going over there. These are the major 3 trends that I can talk about.
Okay. And what are your thoughts on organizations that approach replatforming with their in-house teams versus organizations that use a third-party resource?
Yeah. Well, I used to be a CTO, and I used to own technology teams within a company, a large company. And I put my CTO hat. I'd like to do it myself. I like to do it with my own team. I don't like to work with outside vendors, and I like to keep it within my organization. But, and I've done that before, but there are points at time that I realized that I'm lacking certain skills. I'm lacking certain knowledge about the new thing that is out there. And sometimes my team is so busy, I just didn't have enough time to maintain and rebuild and do replatforming, if you will. So I think it all depends on the case of where your organization is. I suggest first do a check, as I said in my talk. If you have the resources in your team, fine. And if not, identify what is your gap, find a partner. And there's many people that can come in and as a subject matter expert to give you that insight and see what can be augmented in your team to collaborate with you to get the project done.
Okay, thank you. All right, our time is winding down, and I just want to take a moment to say to our audience that a representative from Blanc Labs will be following up with you in the next few days to get your feedback on the webinar and discuss your interest in replatforming. We do have a few questions, so let me get one in there right now. Question from Alex. How will replatforming work if enterprises need to have access to data that stays in legacy systems?
Data that stays in legacy systems. Sure. Well, when you replatform the application, typically if it moves to the cloud, to the new environment, sometimes legacy systems cannot move and they stay on premise. And in my talk, I talked about the bridging point, and that's I think a biggest challenge I see sometimes that these projects that are replatforming hit the wall, is that they not think about how some of the data that remains on-prem will be accessible on the component that moves to the cloud. And the security between these two environments and infrastructures is the pipe that goes between the two is the critical component. There are solutions for that. And so what we need to do in our architecture is to enable the data to be accessible through those pipes between the two, while maintaining the security and the scalability that is needed.
Okay, good. Another question from Brian. What is your recommendation for shift and rebuild versus rebuild and shift? What do you recommend?
Yeah, we talked about not going directly from this quadrant to the other quadrant. You can go through first shift and then rebuild, or you can rebuild and then shift. I would say it depends on your needs. The questions that I said, the checklist, go back to your checklist, Brian, and see what is it the main driver and force behind you. If time is as of an essence for new features, you might as well build those new features first on your existing infrastructure and then move it. If you can do that in a longer period of time, you have some time, move the infrastructure first, and then start building it. It will depend on the drivers again and the resources that you have. And if you don't have the resources and you're totally under pressure, you probably need to bring in help.
And where can you find that help?
Don.
Yeah. Okay. So I think that's all the questions we're going to take right now. The remainder will provide answers through email. And I just want to wrap up at this point and say that concludes our session for today. Appreciate everybody that can join us today. And if there's any additional questions, please send them our way. And that's it. That's a wrap. Good day, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.